Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. The title of this episode is Astral Guide School number 2. Yes, I didn't get kicked out. They gave me another chance. But before we get into that, I'd like to announce a bumper crop of new supporters of the Astral Club channel on Patreon. Arturo Alva is an Astral Master. Timothy E. is an Astral Master. Pilar Matisco is an Astral Master. Nam Nguyen is an Astral Master. And Luke Andrew Brown is an Astral Ascended. Thank you, Natalie. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all the support, and I'm humbled by just how great everybody is on this channel. Okay, Astral Guide School number 2. If you recall from Astral Guide School number 1 real briefly, I was recruited into this school for guides, people who generally have had lifetimes on Earth, and that after they pass on, rather than immediately reincarnating, they offer to help other souls who are undergoing various trials and need advice and guidance. So that was the basis of the first episode. And of course, in that one, I was confronted with a German soldier who had done many things that were very, very awful. And it seemed like forgiveness was the keystone of that episode. This, though, is Astral Guide School number 2. So I'll get right into it. I popped up in a small circular room with a round table. I was last again, which bothered me a little bit. I don't like being last to these types of things, but it is what it is. I can only get there when I can get there. Our teacher was seated along with all the other students. I took the only open seat. So it was the teacher, 11 students, and myself, all in this round table. It was kind of mahogany with inlaid mother of pearl in a wonderful little design that kind of reminded me of some ancient Native American designs that they do in their sand paintings. It was beautiful, but I didn't get a chance to look at it for too long. The teacher opened up right away as to what the test was going to be this time around. He said, "Your test is going to be to convince a tough case, a tough soul, to reincarnate. His name is Ralph, and he was a truck driver on Earth before he passed. He's built himself a little cottage by a lake in the lower to mid-astral, and he is refusing to take the advice of his own guide. So we've been called in to assist and see if we can help to convince him to reincarnate. It's for the greatest good," the teacher said. "He has to agree to this, though. His daughter is she's in a tough way. She's pregnant. She's by herself, and she is still mourning the loss of her father. Apparently, Ralph and his daughter were very close while he was alive. She had problems with drugs in the past, but had kicked them and had her life on track again, and things had been looking good. But then he died, and her boyfriend had left her, and now she was in these desperate straits. So the idea here was that Ralph would be her baby this time around, and that because of their close relationship, they would be able to grow and evolve and support one another together, and it would help them both, their soul's lessons. So this was what needed to happen, and obviously the clock was ticking, because we couldn't wait forever because that baby had to get born, and it needed a soul. I raised my hand to ask a question. And I said, look, what if he won't agree to return to Earth? The teacher looked at me and said, um, it's your job to see that that doesn't happen. Okay, I mean, it was a very succinct answer. There's no doubt about that. But I decided to follow it up with kind of a devil's advocate type of question. I said, I mean, I don't know, outside of this particular situation, perhaps, why is it important? If somebody wants to stay here on the astral, why is it important? Why do we have to always convince them to move on and to reincarnate once again? Well, the teacher smiled at me and he gave me this example. Now, what was cool about it is that while he was communicating this example, he used words and an example that was meaningful to me. But I could tell at the same time he was conveying the similar explanation, but it was in a way in which the others would best understand from their experience. That's possible in telepathy, especially if you're highly skilled. For instance, he started talking to me about what would happen if you had a child who, at the end of first grade, decided they had no interest in going to the second grade. They wanted to stay put in the first or bow out of school altogether. What would you do? Now, while he was telling me this example, there was another student who I was able to overhear, if you can use that word, what he was saying to him. And I call this guy the monk, just between you and me, because he reminded me of a monk. And he was saying, what would happen if a novitiate decided they wanted to stay as a novitiate and not eventually move on as they gained more knowledge, if they wanted to stay there? So it had the same effect on him, I could tell, as this example was having on me. I mean, as a father, naturally, I respected my daughter's will and her thoughts and her intelligence. But there are certain things that, as a parent, you have a responsibility to help them understand, especially when they're at a very young stage and their brains aren't fully developed and they're not able to make, fully informed decisions. And if that had happened to her, I would have, done my best to explain to her that it's impossible to stay at that level. You need to progress. You need to go on. You need to grow. Stagnation might feel safe, but it's the stagnation of a mosquito-filled pool. It's unhealthy. You need to grow. Everything on this planet needs to grow, because when it stops growing, it begins another cycle, which is the other cycle. So growth, it's not an option. It's a necessity. So all of this made sense to me, and I think it certainly answered my question. With no more questions being asked, we disappeared promptly from that round conference table, and we popped up outside a charming little modest chalet near a picturesque, very pretty lake. And I remember thinking to myself, I bet the fishing is good here. What happened was all the students but myself immediately went up to the door of this cottage. I hung back, and the teacher hung back too. And I did that for a reason. So the guy who I privately call the Virgin knocked on the wooden door. I call him that because he gives off that vibe. I'm sure he's a great guy, but anyway, he knocks on the wooden door. And, keep in mind, this guy is radiating peace and holiness and purity. Uh, he's just one of those kind of guys. Anyway, a heavyset man answers the door. You could tell he's a working man. He worked his whole life. He had that rough face and thick hands that you find from a guy who, he worked with his hands. He that's no doubt about that. That was what his whole life was about. He answered the door. He said, "What do you want?" Which obviously was a little on the rude side, but quite frankly, if you knocked on my cottage door and there was a whole crew of people standing outside, I might be a little curious, maybe even a little irritated myself. Well, the Virgin answers him. He goes, "I am here to convince you to return to Earth." Ralph said, "Look, I told the other guy," I think he was referring to his guide, "that I wasn't going back, so get lost." The Virgin answered him with, "You must go back to help mankind's progress." I'll be honest, when I heard this, I kind of stifled a laugh. I couldn't think of a worse thing to say to someone like this guy. And he was properly rewarded for this beautiful statement. When I was given a warning look from the teacher, so I stifled my laugh. But Ralph told him precisely what he could do with mankind's progress. And I can't tell you exactly what his words were because this video would probably be demonetized. I can tell you, though, that I believe what Ralph asked the Virgin to do was physiologically impossible, even in the astral. So that didn't get anywhere. So the Virgin, bless him, he just kind of stepped aside. He wasn't blushing because I don't think that's possible in the astral. But if we'd been in the physical, I'm quite sure he'd be blushing right now. So the next batter up was the guy that I called the monk, because he reminded me of somebody who had been a monk in past lives, and he had that type of peaceful and very centered type personality. So he approached Ralph and said that he had to reincarnate because it was the only way for Ralph to progress spiritually. Well, Ralph indicated he had his spiritual progress right here, pointing downwards. The funniest bit, though, was the monk actually looked down and studied Ralph's lower area down there because I think he was trying to figure out where the spiritual progress was on Ralph. Once again, I was hanging back and just trying not to laugh because I know that I would have gotten myself in trouble again. So the monk, after he was done, I guess he couldn't find what he was looking for on Ralph. So he just kind of, a little bit in shock, he just kind of walked off. I shook my head and I covered my astral eyes. I was embarrassed for the whole class. Now, next up was an American. And keep in mind that this class was very much the United Nations type of thing. So I felt a little bit more of a kinship for this individual, who I will call Ward Cleaver, because he had passed in the 50s. He had been a very, you know what? He reminded me of the guy who had the TV show, Mr. Rogers. That's who he reminded me of. He wasn't wearing one of those button sweaters over his clothing, but he could have been cut from the very same cloth. So he gave it a shot, and he was I think he was a little bit more qualified here. He said, "Look, your daughter needs you. Don't you want to go back and help her? She's pregnant and she's alone now." Now, I watched Ralph's truck driver face very closely, and he did hesitate for a moment. I mean, he had spouted off his answers quite quickly before. This time he hesitated, and he said, she'll be okay without me." Now, he seemed to brush that off, but I think Ward was on to something, and so I decided to approach him. So I walked up to Ralph and I just said, "How's it going?" I offered to shake his hand, and for a second he hesitated, but then he extended his big thick mitt, and we shook hands. I then turned to the class and I said, "Look, why don't we just leave this guy alone? He obviously doesn't want to go back. He's worked hard his whole life. He's tired. We just need to leave him alone." Behind me, I hear Ralph going, "Yeah, yeah." I said, "Look, I have a body on Earth, and it's hard down there." Ralph was, "Yeah, tell him." I said, "And Ralph here, he's a wuss. He just doesn't have the cojones to handle life on Earth. So we should just leave him alone." For a second, Ralph was like, "Yeah, wait, what did you say?" I turned to him and I said, "You heard me. You're too much of a coward to go back to face another lifetime on Earth, 'cause it's a little tough down there. Right, you little wussy baby?" Well, Ralph didn't take that particular approach too well. I could see his anger rising, and he took a swing at me. Now, I had taken the precaution of raising my vibrational level so slightly above, so that as he swung, the fist went right through me. If it had hit me, it wouldn't have hurt me anyway, but I just thought this was more effective. Frustrated with his miss, he decided to take another try, and he swung at me, and of course the punch went right through my astral body, and I just stood there smiling. Ralph wasn't the smartest guy in the world, but I think he realized that there wasn't much point in trying to take another poke at me. He had a few words about what I had said, and once again, if I shared them here, I'd probably get in trouble with the two. But I think you might imagine for yourself some of the words and some of his responses to me. I just let him vent, and I had a nice little smile on my face the whole time. When he finally got tired and calmed down a little bit, I told him that his daughter needed him, and that if he didn't go back to help her and support her, she'd end up back on that same heroin, and she'd probably lose the baby too. And is that something that he was willing to let happen? Yeah, I understand it's tough down there. Believe me, I know. Of all the people here around your little house here, I'm the only one who's still in body. I know it's tough. But you're a tough guy, Ralph. You know it, and I know it. And the only person who you ever gave a damn about was your daughter. And she needs you right now. So what are you going to do? You're going to sit here in this stupid cottage by this make-believe lake? Or are you going to go down there and be a man and help her? It's up to you. We got nothing else to say to you. There's nothing else we can say. It's up to you. What are you going to do? He put his head down, and you could tell he was thinking it over. Finally, he said, "Fine, let's do it. Let's just get it done with." Okay? And with that, he just faded away. Now, the teacher rewarded me with a little smile. The other students kind of crowded around me. And, a couple of them patted me on the back. I think the Virgin was still in shock. The monk was in deep thought. I know he was trying to draw some deeply spiritual lesson from all this, and who knows, maybe he did. I don't know. But the other guys were kind of like, hey, good job. And then they said, how did you know that she would end up back on heroin again, on those drugs, or that she'd lose the baby? How would you know that? I said, well, I didn't. However, I gambled that he would care enough about his daughter that if these things were a possibility, if she was indeed at risk, that he would make the sacrifice and he'd return back to Earth. So finally, the Virgin peeked up. He perked up and said, you lied? I said, well, let's just say that I structured the truth such that it would accomplish our mission, and it would be for the greater good and for the progress of mankind and for the spiritual progress of Ralph and his daughter. So that was my response. With that, I woke up once more back in my room, and I furiously scribbled all of this stuff on my notepad to make sure that I didn't forget anything. I think I may have redeemed myself a little bit from the first episode with this one. Perhaps I bent the rules a little bit, but after all, they have, the teacher did call me a maverick, so sometimes you gotta bend the rules a little bit to accomplish the task. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If you did, why don't you hit the like button and share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you have, why don't you ring that bell and go ahead and hit the give me a question or a comment. And don't forget, if you want to support the channel, the link to Patreon is in the description. Thanks everybody, and I'm Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.